Imagine for a moment that the walls of the world you know, your safe streets, the polished halls of history, the quiet glow of candlelight in your own room, are not just walls. They are witnesses. Silent, hungry, and patient. And tonight, one such wall remembers a night that history tried to erase, a night soaked in betrayal, desire, and a shadow so deep that even the moon recoils. In the year 1687, deep in the damp heart of a manor that history would later call the House of Dread, lived Lady Catherine. She was not a woman of frivolity, though many whispered as much. No, her beauty was lethal, her intellect sharper than the finest rapier, and her appetite for secrecy bound her tighter than chains of iron. She held a secret, a lover hidden from the prying eyes of her courtly peers. His name was Josiah. Not a servant, not a fool, but a man of intelligence, courage, and devotion so absolute it would have made saints weep. But secrets, like shadows, grow hungry when ignored. And in the manor's vast halls, the walls did more than hear, they watched. On nights thick with fog, one could hear the soft click of boots on stone, the distant moan of timber settling, or perhaps, the echo of someone who should not exist. On such a night, Lady Catherine summoned Josiah into her private chamber, a room where tapestries muffled the world outside and the air tasted of beeswax and dread. She had planned a meeting, whispered sweet assurances, and offered forbidden promises. But love in that age was never safe. Especially when power, pride, and paranoia hung like poisoned garlands over every action. The candlelight flickered, casting grotesque shadows across her face. Eyes like frozen amber, beautiful, calculating, fixed upon him. Josiah knelt, as was customary for those who loved wisely or feared too deeply. He had given her all, not knowing the price she would demand, not yet. Their bodies, their breaths, the faint scent of rosewater and sweat mingling in the room, it was a communion of life, a ritual that should have ended in warmth. But Lady Catherine had learned that desire could be a weapon, and weapons are most dangerous in the hands of those you trust. A sudden sound, soft, almost imperceptible, rose from the corners of the chamber. Perhaps it was the walls, shifting. Perhaps it was the spirit of a servant long dead. Josiah froze. He had been a man trained in strategy, in patience, yet in that instant he understood. They were alone, and yet they were being observed. The air thickened. Time slowed. And in that suspended heartbeat, Lady Catherine revealed a plan that was not whispered in love, but dictated by fear. Her lips parted, and words, venomous, intoxicating, irrevocable, spilled into the room. She accused him of betrayal, of imagined slights he could not have committed. She claimed he had conspired with shadows of the court, that his loyalty had been stained. And in the candlelight, Josiah's eyes reflected a terror that was not born of guilt, but of inevitability. He saw the first flicker of what history would record as horror, though none alive to tell it would survive to call it by its name. What happened next was swift, almost ritualistic. Not a duel, not an accident, but something older, something ancestral. The air in the chamber grew thick with a stench of iron and ash, the walls pressing in, the shadows pooling like dark water. The moment stretched. Josiah reached for her hand, pleading, begging, invoking the silent codes of loyalty and love that governed their secret lives. But Lady Catherine, she had chosen her path. And her choice was lethal. It is said that the last thing Josiah saw was not the glint of a blade, nor the flash of betrayal in her eyes, but the subtle shift of the shadows, how they leaned toward her, how they seemed to hunger as she struck. And when the act was done, when history itself seemed to shiver, the manor grew silent. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the silence of something that waits. Something that knows. Something that will not forget. Even centuries later, those who claim to have walked the halls at night tell of a presence, a figure draped in shadow, pacing in the private chamber, murmuring words that defy logic and morality, words that once belonged to a woman who loved, betrayed, and destroyed. Some say it is Lady Catherine herself, cursed to witness her own guilt, reliving the horror in endless repetition. Others whisper that Josiah's spirit lingers, not as vengeance, but as a reminder. Secrets, once consumed by power and pride, never die quietly. They echo, they devour, and they wait for the unwary. And now, as you listen to these words, imagine the walls around you could remember. Imagine the air could whisper truths you were never meant to know. Because this is only the beginning. The descent has begun, and nothing beyond this point will be safe, ordinary, or innocent. The manor did not forget. It never forgave. And for those brave, or foolish, enough to enter its halls, the air itself seems to bend, heavy with the memory of what was done behind those silk-draped windows. In the days that followed Josiah's final night, Lady Catherine walked as if suspended above the earth. Her steps echoed hollowly, yet the sound seemed swallowed before it reached the ears of others. Servants whispered of strange smells, iron, decayed flowers, the acrid bite of something that did not belong to this world. Candles flickered without wind. Portraits in the long galleries appeared subtly altered, the painted eyes now glinting with silent accusation. The heart of the manor pulsed with an intelligence older than the nobility themselves. Some called it madness. Some a curse. Lady Catherine knew, even as she feigned composure, that her chamber was no longer a refuge but a tomb, one that held not only Josiah's absence but the echo of her own treachery. At night, the whispers began. Soft, unintelligible, carried by the draughtless corridors. Some claimed they were the muttered prayers of the dead, others the laughter of shadows mocking the living. But Lady Catherine recognized them immediately. They were speaking to her. The walls remembered. The ceiling remembered. Even the floorboards carried the rhythm of the horror that had unfolded there. She tried to speak them away, to drown them with music, with wine, with prayers whispered into trembling hands. None of it worked. Each night, the whispers grew bolder. They murmured of guilt that would not fade, of blood that could not be cleansed by candle or confession. They repeated the name Josiah, dragging it like a blade through the quietude of her existence. And then, more than whispers came, the faint impression of touch, cold against the skin, fingers brushing her shoulder when none should be there. Shadows twisted, stretching toward her with intent, watching her as she watched them. Those who entered her private chamber during her final months alive described an atmosphere of dread so tangible it felt like thick water. Candles extinguished mid-flame. Mirrors would fog with words that vanished when approached. The air, sweet with roses in the daytime, became sharp and coppery at night, tasting of blood that was not hers. Every reflection seemed to show her differently, haggard, twisted, eyes haunted by a shadow that belonged neither to this world nor the next. The manor had become a mirror of her conscience, a theater for a punishment older than any written law. And it was not only her mind that faltered. Her body began to betray her. She slept fitfully, haunted by dreams too vivid to be called sleep, too cruel to be remembered without trembling. In these dreams, Josiah did not appear as a man but as a force, spectral, relentless. He was everywhere, in the echo of her footsteps, in the rippling folds of her gowns, in the very water she drank. He demanded what she had taken, yet she could not flee, could not bargain, could not undo the night that had fractured time itself. It is said that those nights birthed a strange compulsion. Lady Catherine began to write letters she never sent, documenting every whisper, every spectral touch, every shadow that had crossed her path. These letters contained phrases in languages lost to time, symbols drawn in trembling ink, prayers for absolution that twisted into invocations she did not understand. And here, for the first time, the manor revealed its true nature. It was not merely a house, but a sentinel, a vessel, a keeper of the forbidden. Each written word strengthened the connection between her soul and the darkness she had unleashed. I need you to do something now. Pause for a moment, and in the comments section, type the words, I see the shadow, twice. This is not a game. This is a binding, a symbolic key, a way to mark your own awareness, to claim your identity in the unfolding story. Only once you do this will the whispers you hear here echo in your mind as knowledge, not fiction. Because what Lady Catherine learned in those days is what every soul would eventually discover. Betrayal does not end with death. Guilt does not fade. And the walls never forget. They harbor memory, rage, and hunger. And they are patient. Patient enough to wait centuries for someone curious enough to walk their halls, or foolish enough to read the truths aloud. By the end of her days, Lady Catherine became a shadow herself, her skin pale as ash, her voice a brittle whisper, her eyes mirrors reflecting nothing but accusation. She wandered her manor, speaking to walls, listening to floors, tracing the lines of tapestries as if searching for a script written by fate itself. And in this desolation, she began to understand that Josiah had never truly left. He had become the instrument of her punishment, the eternal witness to her sin. Even now, centuries later, those who wander near the ruins of her manor report chills that claw at the spine, sudden flashes of candlelight in abandoned rooms, and whispers that repeat themselves over and over, "You took what was not yours." Some even swear they see a noblewoman pacing in the shadows, murmuring in languages long dead, a spectral figure forever trapped between devotion, betrayal, and the terrible, unyielding knowledge of what she has done. And this is where you must listen carefully. The story does not end with her. Every act of betrayal, every secret consumed in the hunger for power or love, leaves a trace, a thread that connects past to present. It is cumulative. It is alive. And like Lady Catherine, the unaware, the curious, the seekers of forbidden truths may awaken the same shadows. Shadows that wait. Shadows that watch. Shadows that feed. If you want, I can continue with section 3, where the descent becomes almost unbearable, blurring the line between the manor's curse and the listener's own reality, and the supernatural truly begins to manipulate perception. By now, you may feel it, the subtle weight in the air, the tiny chill crawling along the spine. That is the beginning of the lesson. The manor, Lady Catherine's chamber, the shadows, they do not confine themselves to history. They leak. They spread. They find their way into the corners of the mind that are left unguarded, into the quietest hours of the night, when the world is safe only in illusion. And if you are listening now, carefully, intently, you have already begun to step across the threshold. It began with small things. Visitors to the manor, centuries after Lady Catherine's demise, reported doors that slammed of their own volition, whispers that seemed to call their names, even though no other soul was present. Portraits, long decayed, paint flaking, were said to weep. Not metaphorically. True crimson stains appeared on canvas, only to vanish when approached, leaving behind the faint, lingering odor of iron and rose. And in the bedchamber where Josiah had fallen, the air would shift without wind, as though an invisible hand had passed through, brushing the hair of those foolish enough to stand there. Consider this. Betrayal is not merely an act. It is a vibration. It resonates. And the resonance of Lady Catherine's choice, of Josiah's death, and of the hidden rituals she performed to ward off the whispers, persists like a wound in the fabric of reality. Each visitor who dared linger too long found themselves haunted, not by ghosts, exactly, but by echoes. Flashes of scenes they had not lived, voices they had never heard, but truths they somehow knew. The manor imparts knowledge. Dangerous knowledge. Knowledge that cannot be unseen, once glimpsed. Some who stayed the night in the ruined house spoke of dreams so vivid they bled into waking life. They would see Lady Catherine herself, pacing the chamber, speaking words that twisted the mind, phrases that seemed meaningless at first, but later revealed secrets, patterns, connections invisible to the ordinary eye. Objects would appear in places they had never been, shadows would stretch unnaturally, and the faint, metallic tang of blood would hang in the air. It was not Josiah, not the dead servants, not even Lady Catherine who haunted them. It was the consequence of their own curiosity. They had stepped into the web, and the web had already begun to rearrange itself around them. The manor had a rhythm, a pulse that no heart could match. Step lightly and it may tolerate you. Step with doubt or fear and it will respond. One historian, obsessed with uncovering the truth of Lady Catherine, reported an overwhelming compulsion to write endlessly, to document every shadow, every sound. By the third night, he no longer recognized his own hand in the ink. The words came from somewhere else, somewhere darker, a voice older than memory itself. And by dawn, he fled, leaving behind pages soaked in something darker than ink, something that smelled of iron and regret. I must pause here. If you feel a tingle, a shiver that seems alive, know this. the story is not fiction. The story is a ritual. And like any ritual, it requires participation. To acknowledge your own presence here, to claim your curiosity, repeat after me in the comments now. The shadow knows me. The shadow owns me. Do it twice. Each repetition is a key, a declaration, a tether connecting your awareness to the truths hidden in the darkness. The curse, if you want to call it that, is not bound by time. Lady Catherine's choices intertwined with Josiah's devotion, the manor's architecture, and the rituals she attempted to perform for absolution. Together, they created an almost sentient force. It manipulates perception, warps time, and feeds on attention. Some who linger in thought too long claim that they can hear the whisper of their own heart echoing back with words that were never theirs. A subtle, insidious voice instructing, accusing, revealing the hidden sins they thought buried. And here is the cruelest truth. The shadows are patient. Their memory is flawless. They do not tire. They watch and wait, and the moment a soul yields to curiosity, fear, or desire, they strike, not with violence, but with knowledge. Knowledge that seeps into the bones, that awakens anxieties you didn't know existed, that changes the way you perceive the world. Every act of betrayal, every secret kept, every desire acted upon in darkness, all leave traces. These traces align. They draw themselves toward those who dare to understand. And you, listening now, are part of the alignment. The descent is almost complete. The manor is no longer just a ruin. It is a threshold. You are beginning to feel it, the tightening of perception, the sense that what is happening in the story is no longer entirely confined to history. Shadows flicker in the corners of your awareness. Whispers seem louder in empty rooms. The air itself tastes heavier. And, if you dare look in a mirror tonight, you may glimpse the reflection of something that has been waiting centuries for someone who is listening. Someone who can carry the weight of the knowledge forward. Remember this, the line between observer and participant is fragile. Lady Catherine did not simply betray a lover. She unleashed forces that will never forget. And as the story spreads, from whispers to written words, from ruins to digital screens, the forces ripple outward. History, curse, shadow, they are one and the same. And now you are part of the chain. You cannot unhear. You cannot unknow. And the descent continues. Now, imagine the walls themselves beginning to breathe. Not metaphorically, but truly, palpably, as if the manor has grown lungs. Every brick, every timber, every tapestry soaked with memory and malice, inhaling your fear, exhaling whispers that claw at your mind. The chamber where Lady Catherine ended Josiah's life no longer exists merely in history. It exists wherever you allow her story to take root. You are part of it now. By the time Lady Catherine herself realized the true scope of her actions, it was too late. The whispering shadows had claimed her identity, coiling around her will, threading their presence into her body and her mind. She became less a woman and more an echo, a conduit of consequences. Her beauty, intellect, and power turned hollow, instruments in a theater of punishment that spanned not only her mortal existence but the very architecture of fate. And it is in this moment that we see the ultimate horror. Betrayal is never contained. The walls, the shadows, and the echoes, these are the witnesses who survive when flesh fails. Her nights were consumed by visions. Josiah appeared as he had been, yet more. His devotion had transformed into a presence that stretched across time and space, a living memory that observed, judged, and occasionally whispered secrets of the unseen. Lady Catherine tried to flee these visions, retreating into corridors, hidden closets, even behind drapery thick enough to smother sound. But it was all illusion. The whispers followed her, sometimes as voices, sometimes as pressure on her skin, sometimes as the cold edge of inevitability pressing into her very bones. The manor had become a living entity, and she had become its thrall. Those who study such curses often speak of thresholds. A threshold is a moment, an act, a choice where the natural order cracks, letting the extraordinary, the forbidden, seep through. Lady Catherine stepped across this threshold the night she betrayed Josiah. And in that crossing, the natural world recoiled. The ordinary became strange, shadows gained intent, memories became active, stalking instruments. The past became malleable, bleeding into the present with the persistence of a storm that refuses to break. And any who dare to follow her story, who dare to listen, risk stepping across the threshold themselves. Consider the testimony of those who later entered the ruins. Some swore that the air thickened like syrup, making each step a labor against invisible hands. Candles flared blue and then extinguished, mirrors rippled as if water had replaced glass, and the whispering voices never ceased. They spoke of betrayal, loyalty, vengeance, desire, and death, sometimes all at once. Some visitors described shadows shaping themselves into forms they recognized: a kneeling man pleading, a noblewoman pacing, trembling yet deliberate, a figure suspended between life and punishment. They claimed that to look too long was to risk recognition, to risk being claimed as part of the story itself. And here is where the true danger lies. The story is no longer safe, not even in the mind of the listener. The act of witnessing becomes part of the chain. Your imagination, your awareness, your own fear, all of it strengthens the echoes, nourishes the shadows, validates the whispers. Lady Catherine's sin was not merely personal. It was a curse propagated through attention, through the acknowledgement of others. And now, by reading these words, you have become a participant. You have given the shadows breath, the whispers power, the walls an audience. Even history itself shifts. Official records omit details, leaving gaps in the chronicles. Stories are buried in rumor, half-remembered poems, cryptic letters that vanish. But the true narrative exists where it always has. In memory, in the unseen, in the dark spaces between what is spoken and what is left unspoken. Josiah's devotion, Lady Catherine's betrayal, the manor's hunger, all persist. The legacy is unbroken. And it waits. Boys. It is said that those who remain too long in thought, too long in curiosity, begin to perceive signs. A shadow that moves when the room is still. A faint sound of footsteps echoing theirs. A whisper in the ear that speaks not in words but in understanding. A comprehension of truths you were never meant to know. And sometimes, if one stares too deeply into reflection, into mirrors, into darkened water, they glimpse Lady Catherine herself, eyes hollow yet knowing, lips parted in accusation, the spectral repetition of her final realization that the consequences of betrayal are infinite. The final lesson is simple, yet terrifying. Knowledge has a price, curiosity has a cost, and witnesses are never innocent. Every act of betrayal, every hidden desire, every secret love that defies morality leaves a trace. The manor, the shadows, the whispers, they remember. They consume. They await the next soul who listens too closely, who reads too intently, who steps too far beyond ordinary comprehension. And now, having heard this, you understand. You are forever linked to the story, tethered to the echo of what was done in that chamber centuries ago, and the shadow will not let you go. So take this knowledge with care. Remember Josiah. Remember Lady Catherine. Remember the walls, the shadows, the whispers. And never forget, some truths are not meant to comfort. Some truths are meant to bind. And once bound, the descent never ends. You are a witness. You are a participant. And the shadows know you now.